All right, wonderful. Welcome, Senator Bellows and Representative Warren. So happy to have you here for a behind the scenes with committee chairs. And I'm Desti Homan-Sprague, the Executive Director of the Maine Women's Lobby Education Fund. And I'd love for you both to introduce yourselves and share your district and how long you've been in the Maine legislature. So Shanna, if you want to start, Senator Bellows.
Great. I'm Senator Hanna Bellows, and I live in Manchester, Maine. I represent Senate District 14, which is 11 towns in southern Kennebec County. I grew up in Maine, in the town of Hancock. One thing I want everyone to know is that I grew up without electricity or running water. We were very poor. I worked in nonprofits most of my life. I did the Peace Corps and AmeriCorps. And I think that it's really just important for everyone to know that what's great about Maine is we have a citizen legislature. You don't have to be wealthy to run for office here. You don't have to be wealthy or powerful to become a committee chair. Hard work and determination can get you there. So I was elected in 2016. I served in the minority, meaning that Democrats were in the minority in the Senate. So I served on the Labor, Commerce, Research, and Economic Development Committee. And when Democrats won the majority of the state Senate in 2018, I was elevated to chair a new iteration of that committee that we call the Labor and Housing Committee. And that's what I currently chair right now.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Representative Warren.
Great, thank you, and thank you for having us on. This is fun, and I just want to say hi to all the girls who are part of this, and we expect to see you in the legislature in a decade or so. We need more of you, so please come join us. I am Charlotte Warren, and I live in Hollowell. I live in one of the cities that Senator Bellows represents. I represent Hollowell, Manchester, and West Gardner. I grew up on a farm in Pittston, Maine, which is about 15 minutes from where I live right now. My sort of professional experience includes being an educator. I served as an instructor at a community college for 12 years before I left that career to become a social worker. So I'm a social worker. I served on the Hollowell City Council before being a representative. So I served as 8 years as a city councilor and then 4 years as mayor, and then ran for representative. I've been a state representative representing this district for 6 years, and I've been serving as the chair of the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee for 4 years.
Nice. Wonderful. Thank you both so much. So let's talk a little bit about the role of committees in general, because committees play such an important part in the legislative process, but it's sometimes, if you're not accustomed to how bills become a law or how the legislature works, it's new to some people. So do either of you want to share a bit about where committees fit into the legislative process?
Let's have Representative Warren start with that, because here's a secret about committees. The House controls the committees. We have joint committees with members of the Senate and members of the House, but the House makes up a majority of the committees and really plays a leadership role in the committee process.
Thank you, Senator. What's interesting about being the chair of a committee, first I'll tell you a little about what a committee does. So every bill that comes into the legislature, so by Senator Bellows might, have an idea from her constituent or her own experience and write a bill, and it will come into the legislature, and then it gets referred to a committee of jurisdiction, a committee that deals with that particular topic. So it will, first go to the House and the Senate, get referred, and then we call it getting sent upstairs, basically, to a committee level. Committees have their own jurisdiction, and I'll let Senator Bellows talk about hers, but mine specifically, the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee, is everything dealing with guns and jails and drugs and emergency medical services and the fire marshal's office and code enforcement. I mean, it really runs the gamut of things that we have jurisdiction over. Every bill gets a real thorough vetting at the committee level before it's then sent back out to the chamber where the sponsor serves. So if it's Senator Bellows' bill, once it comes through the committee, it will go to the Senate first. If it's my bill, once it comes through the committee, it will go to the House first. Every bill that comes to the committee receives both a public hearing. So we as chairs, that's part of our responsibility, is to schedule every bill for a public hearing, which is a time when any Mainer, legislators, advocates, lobbyists, right? Everybody can come in and have their time to weigh in on, this is a good idea, this is a bad idea, or I don't have a judgment about the idea, but I want to give you some more information about it. You know, then we move on to something that's called a work session. And a work session is where the legislative committee really gets down and does the work and spends the time discussing, I like this part of it, I can't live with this part of it. This seems really similar to something we did last year. You know, then we'll ask our analyst, who's our sort of the lawyer in the room, you know, can you bring us more information? Have we done this before? What's the history of this, etc. So trying to give you a picture of a real thorough vetting of this bill will happen in the committee. And sometimes you'll have multiple work sessions. Sometimes you'll have one work session and it's a pretty simple fix or a very needed new idea. The bill is voted and reported out. Sometimes it's a much longer process. So that's sort of the basics. And let me hand it over to Senator Bellows to say more about what we do.
Great. That was an excellent overview of the committees. So each committee has 13 members, 10 House members, and 3 senators. And so each committee has 2 chairs, a Senate chair and a House chair. So in my committee in Labor and Housing, I'm the Senate chair. In Representative Warren's committee in Criminal Justice, she's the House chair. So Representative Warren talked about scheduling, and that's a huge piece of what the chairs do. We organize all of the work of the committee. We get hundreds of bills that come to our committees are particularly busy. And we have to make sure that there's a time for the public to come to the State House to talk about those bills and talk about what they feel. So what happens when there's a public hearing? As committee chairs, it's our job to make sure everything goes smoothly, to make sure it's fair, that everyone who is both for a bill or against a bill or just has some opinions and information to share is heard in a fair and respectful way. And that's really important, especially because sometimes we deal with super controversial issues where people have very strongly held beliefs, and they need to trust that as chairs, we're going to make sure that their perspective and their opinions are fully heard. So I see that as one of our most important roles. A second role in the COVID-19 pandemic is making sure that everyone feels safe. So under the rules, our committees technically have to meet in person. And my committee just had a hearing about unemployment, for example. So another thing committees do is we invite governmental representatives from different agencies, from the executive branch under the jurisdiction of the governor, to come and report to us what's happening and what they need to get the job done for the people of Maine. So one thing my committee did this week is we made sure that all of our committee members were wearing masks because some of our committee members have serious health problems. And then, so as chair, it's my job to set the rules and then make sure the rules are followed and that everyone feels safe, welcome, and respected in that committee room during that proceeding.
That's that's great. Thank you so much. One of the things as an observer to the legislature for many years, I've always been really interested in about the committee process is how many sort of technical things there are. There's a really special process for how people are invited to speak or how members of the committee get to ask questions and orders of how those conversations happen. Would either of you like to talk a little bit about how you learn some of the process? Like technically, how do you learn how to chair a committee?
So I'll start because I feel like I'm at the earliest part in my learning. Keep in mind, Maine is celebrating its bicentennial. And our government is 200 years old. So many of these rules date back to the founding of our state. And some of them seem very antiquated because, for example, in a committee, members of the committee, those 12 members, have to get permission from the chair before they can ask a question or speak. And you think, well, wait a second, they're senators and representatives too. What do you mean they have to get permission? But that's just one of the rules that was set up over history and is part of keeping that process organized and orderly and fair. There are a few places we look, at the beginning of every legislative session, committee passes its own rules, and usually what the committee passes for rules are copies of rules that committees before have passed, and they're taking a look and seeing if it works or doesn't work and needs a little changing. There are also rules that at the beginning of every legislature, the House and the Senate pass what's called joint rules governing the whole House and Senate. So committee has to read and look at those rules too. And again, those rules are based on the rules of the previous legislature. So it sort of stacks up on itself. And then we also have the whole country uses two sets of rules, one called Mason's rules that are specific to committees. So if a committee set of rules doesn't answer a question that someone has about process, and the House and Senate rules don't answer that question, then you go to Mason's. And sometimes if Mason's doesn't have the answer, there's something called Robert's Rules of Order. So there are all these rules that you read and as a committee chair try to remember, or in my case, I have a big notebook. So if I forget something, I can look at it. So those are the written rules. But Representative Warren, do you want to talk about the unwritten rules? Because that's the other piece, that it feels like every committee has its own culture that also develops over time. Like my committee is pretty fiery. My committee is a committee, the Labor Committee tends to have members who have very polar opposite opinions. And historically, my committee has sent out a lot of what we call divided reports, where Republicans vote one way and Democrats vote another way. So one of the things I've tried to do is see, okay, we may disagree and disagree strongly about some things, but can we come together and agree to disagree in sort of a respectful way? But every committee has its own unwritten rules and culture. Representative Warren, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's interesting. My first 2 years on the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee, I was not the chair, and I was serving on 2 committees at that point. I served on Criminal Justice, and I also served on Judiciary Committee next door. So for 2 years, I did a lot of sort of going back and forth between 2 committees and watching the culture, very different culture of those 2 committees. I used to refer to the Judiciary Committee, if it was a TV show, it would have been Masterpiece Theater. Right? It was so, it was serious, it was a lot of lawyers, and then I'd go next door to the Criminal Justice Committee, and I referred to that as the Real Housewives of the legislature. It was just as you'd think a group of lawyers and a group of police officers would be, right? It was very different. I then spent the next few years really lobbying to change the membership of the Criminal Justice Committee. When I first started, I mean, just a few years ago, and Desti, I'm sure you know this and you experienced this, just a few years ago, the Criminal Justice Committee was only men. There were no women serving, right?
I recall. In fact, I remember the first time I used to work in sexual violence. The first time I went into the Criminal Justice Committee with that makeup and looked around the room and looked around again, could not believe it, that it was in the 2000s.
Yeah.
There were no women on the Criminal Justice Committee.
Yes.
I was actually thrown out of the criminal justice room, not for doing anything obstreperous, but because I was talking about racism and racial profiling that sometimes happens with law enforcement, systemic, problematic, structural racism that we have in our criminal justice system in the state of Maine. And the committee chair at the time, he's no longer the legislature, got very offended. And he was like, "You, out of this room." Which is interesting because committee chairs can actually control who gets to be in the room and who doesn't. It's not something that committee chairs exercise very often. I have never thrown anyone out of my committee room. But I'm laughing as you're talking about the Real Housewives of the legislature, Representative Warren, because that was definitely my experience prior to being a legislator, was that committee was very, there was some sexism and some just, it was a different world, and you have definitely changed the culture. And I think women in leadership do that in general. I think in the same way in my committee, I've tried to bring the temperature down, right? Like you can disagree and disagree fervently and fight passionately for what we believe in and try to make positive change, but you don't have to be a big jerk about it, right? Like you don't have to yell at each other. You know, let's have a dialogue. Let's listen to each other. Maybe sometimes the other side has a good idea, right? So I think that cultural change through your leadership, Representative Warren, is really apparent. And it's something that as chair of the Labor and Housing Committee, I've also tried to bring to my committee. And that also extends to respect for people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. I remember before I was a chair in my committee, a woman who was a low-wage worker making minimum wage came into the committee room, and the chair made her cry, made her feel embarrassed and ashamed. And I followed her out and I said, "I want to thank you for coming. You know, I can tell it's your first time coming to the legislature. This is the people's house. We serve you, and you should call me anytime." But I resolved that as chair, I would never make anyone feel embarrassed to be in my room, that I want to hear from the people that never come to the legislature. I want to hear from people that have real life experiences that are really, really problematic. Representative Warren, your dogs are the cutest things.
Thank you. I thought you might as well see them since you could hear them. This is Tank. This is Tank, and this is Tissue. And I have to hold them right now because my neighbors are right out. I live in a condo association and my neighbors are right out back. So the dogs want to go see them, but they're gonna wait until we're done. So I think one of the things that has been important in the Criminal Justice Committee is that my co-chair, who's an amazing woman and senator from Southern Maine, Senator DeChambeau, my co-chair and I have had a lot of conversations about you can show strength of being good at presenting ideas, good at listening, good at navigating tough topics, good at making sure everybody gets their voices heard. Those strengths are even appreciated by some people whose only strength is to talk louder and to be more fervent. And sometimes that is a go-to that we'll see happen with men. They end up talking a little louder and maybe talking a little more and getting more words in there, whereas we can show our strength by always, even when it's tough, remaining very, one of my skills is when other people get louder, I get more quiet, I get more slow, and I get more thoughtful. And if I need to, I will very calmly and quietly say, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Just like that. We're going to take a 5-minute break. And that's just time for me to step outside with the folks on the other side that are feeling very angry about something. And everybody does it. It happens. It's real. We all have, you know, personal experiences. And when we're talking about drug laws in a state where most everybody has someone struggling with substance use disorder, things can get very heated. When we're talking about guns, which we have to do a lot in a place, in a time where gun conversations have really become sort of the third rail of politics. And just what I mean by that is, you know, they've become a real divider. We have to take breaks. And I have to remind people, I am going to make sure you get to say everything you want to say, but possibly not all at once. Right? And so I really do very purposefully not try to get larger in my seat and louder in my seat, but I actually tend to get smaller in my seat and more quiet. And I think that people, I know because I've heard it so much, and I know because of how the culture has changed, that's a strength. And that is a sign of strength, and it's sometimes, you know, surprising for other members, but we don't have fights anymore in the Criminal Justice Committee. It is no longer the Real Housewives of the legislature, and that's a
head of the ACLU.
say again.
You're
No,
not
we aren't.
Head of the ACLU, like I was thrown out of the Criminal Justice Committee before.
Right. No, we haven't had to do that. Yeah. Yeah, but I think that's what women bring. I have to say that all of you, you know, when you think about, my neighbor's trying to get my attention, you know, as girls right now, I want you to remember that you have strengths that just inherently you're going to learn through your interactions with society and culture, and, you know, just the way that you're raised and just the way people interact with you. Although sometimes those things can be a struggle, you're learning very important ways to manage, and it's going to make you a better politician, a better boss, a better manager. And it's something I think we don't talk about a lot, but it's really true. When we can rely on what our natural skills are, we just do better.
Dusty, can we talk a little bit about people who come to our committees? And one of the things that I want everyone who's participating in Girls' Day to hear is that we want to hear from you. So one of the things that's most exciting to me is when young people come to the legislature and use their voice. So for example, I represent the town of Reedfield, and Marana Cook has a student health center at the school. And under Governor LePage, funding for the school-based health centers was eliminated. So what was really cool was to see Marana Cook students from Reedfield and Manchester come to the State House and talk about how the school-based health center had made a difference in their lives and why it was important to fund it. And guess what? We won. We restored that funding. So I've seen that time and time again. if there's an issue that really matters to students, and their school is willing, take that time to come to the State House. Maybe you can't come to the State House to testify, but you can send us an email. You can let us know what you think about climate change, or equal pay for equal work, or whatever the issue might be. I think that young people have a lot of really good ideas, and one of the cool things about the Maine legislature is I think we're pretty responsive to the public, because we recognize, because every bill is going to get a vote, we need to learn as much as we can about as many issues as we can. And I think we all really are trying to represent all of our constituents. So when you do come to the legislature, you only get 3 minutes to talk, but 3 minutes is a lot longer than you might think. And so usually members of the public will write out what they're going to say, so type it up and then make, it depends on the committee. Some committees request 20 copies, some committees request 25 photocopies. You bring it with you and you read that 3-minute statement. And the first time I testified, and I still do this sometimes, I always practice, and I sometimes practice before a mirror, like, what do I want to say to this committee in only 3 minutes? But it's huge. It makes such a difference. And committees love hearing from people we've never heard from before, right? Like, if you're speaking for the first time because you're really passionate about access to birth control, or whatever issue, Planned Parenthood, whatever issue that really inspires you and makes you want to make a difference, we want to know about that.
Yes. I will say I have, as I've given testimony for 15 years, and I still get nervous.
Yeah. Yeah. When I go into a new committee, and I was giving testimony before I became a legislator, and now 6 years as a legislator, when I go before a committee I haven't been before, I get nervous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's part of the process. And sometimes I think it makes us better, right? Like, if you're a little nervous, you're going to be better prepared. And if you're better prepared, then you're going to be on fire and you're going to be effective.
Yeah.
Right.
And also, nobody can ever tell how nervous you actually feel. You might feel really nervous inside. People can't tell most of the time.
Exactly.
They're too busy thinking about how they feel about things.
I remind myself that feeling nervous is it's a reminder that I really care about what I'm doing. And then I am reminded that the other people on the other side of the horseshoe, as we call it, really care about what they're doing. Like, legislators are not there because they don't care. They do care.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the bad news. Legislators in Maine don't make very much money. So if you want to go into politics for the money, it's better to run for Congress than for the state legislature. But everyone's really passionate, and it really is an honor and a privilege as a committee chair to be able to preside over these public hearings and create a space for the public to speak, and then take all of those ideas and opinions and look at the proposal itself, and we're actually making the law. We are writing the laws of the state of Maine, or editing the laws of the state of Maine, changing them based on what we're hearing from the public about how it is or isn't working for them. So the public hearing is such a privilege to get to hear everyone's ideas. And then you're in a work session, and it's 13 people, just the committee members themselves, sitting there and reading through that section of the law, line by line sometimes, talking through, like, does this word make more sense, or does this word make more sense? We heard from this many people that this needed to change, but this person raised this issue. And so you're kind of really talking through policy, and that if the committee is unanimous on something, then that's probably going to be the law. And if you can get a majority of the committee to come up with a compromise, maybe it's not everything that you wanted, but a meaningful change, that could change people's lives. When we passed, so I presided over paid time off hearings, paid sick leave for workers. And that was very controversial The hearing was very long. A lot of members of the public contacted us, and there were a lot of competing ideas. Some businesses didn't want to give their workers paid time off. Some businesses wanted to give their workers paid time off, but wanted some limits or some structure. There were a lot of conflicting opinions. We came up with a compromise paid time off bill, and a woman who's worked for over a decade at McDonald's reached out to me and said, "Thank you so much. I've never had paid time off before." That's why we do this work, right? Like that is, you know, you in that work session, you're like editing the paid time off laws, you're making some changes, and you're trying to reach a compromise and trying to reach a majority. And then you send it out to the Senate or to the House, depending on who was the sponsor, and the Senate and the House vote, and then they send it to the governor and it gets signed into law. And you know, because of the work that you did on the committee, looking line by line by line at the laws of the state of Maine and changing them, that you've probably made a difference in someone's lives, and maybe made a difference in thousands of Mainers' lives, or made a historic difference that's going to change the state for the rest of history.
Yeah. I had wanted to end with, you know, what are your favorite parts? I feel like that is just such a compelling story. It's certainly one of my favorite parts of getting to support work at the legislature. And I wonder if Representative Warren, you want to share some of those parting thoughts as well.
Favorite parts of being a committee chair?
Yeah.
I think probably, I mean, my favorite part of being a committee chair is all of the interactions that we get to have, we have the opportunity to have around a particular piece of policy. So it is our job to, you know, every morning of session, I, along with my other co-chairs, chairs that are in the House, we meet in the Speaker of the House's office. And it is our job to talk about what the bill is and what's the story with the bill and what's our goal and what's our plan. And then we do that same thing with our caucus, which is our larger group of legislators, right? There are, I can't even remember now, 77, 78 of us as House Democrats, right? And so we all meet, and it's my job as chair to present to my colleagues, here's this bill, and here's what it means, and here's why we did what we did. But also I get to interact with folks like Dusty, who are there, pushing us in one way or another and giving us really important information, bringing, the voice of Maine women to bear on what makes this a good decision or how we should change it. I also get to interact with the sponsor. So the sponsor might be Senator Bellows, and we get to sit and have conversations about why, her opinion is this and my opinion may be this, and how can we come to the same place. But also then there's the interaction with all of the folks in the public who have, concerns. We tend to be the face. We become the face of a bill that maybe we didn't even put in or think about, or then we're interacting also with the press, and we are the face of that committee, and often being asked out of the committee room, hey, can I get you on TV camera to talk about this bill, right? Or a newspaper story, or so there are ultimately endless opportunities for us to interact with folks that are there representing Mainers, who are there trying to get information to Mainers, and learning and interacting. And I love that about it. I love that it's difficult, right? I love that it can sometimes feel like, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing on this one, right? It is not boring. I don't go every morning at 8 o'clock to a cubicle and stay there until 4 o'clock and then go home. My work is never boring. It can sometimes make you cry. It can sometimes make you very angry, and it can sometimes also make you feel like you just changed the state of Maine. And that is a feeling that I can't even describe, right? When you get a time to get a bill signed and you know that this is making a difference for not just people in your community, but people in the whole state, that's a pretty good feeling. So I like how difficult it is. I like, listen, I'm not a fan of being bored. If I get bored, I start to get angry, right? So I got to tell you, hunkering in is sometimes a little bit of a struggle, but that's what makes it really rewarding. And I think that's what I like the most, is that dealing with all the people can be as challenging as dealing with the issue, and can also be as rewarding.
Mm. Senator Bellows, did you have parting thoughts to share?
I think Representative Warren just captured it so well. I would say to every girl that has listened to this entire workshop, you need to run for office someday, and you need to chair committees. We are not yet at 50-50 representation in the whole Maine legislature, where we've made a lot of progress in the last couple of years, but we have some progress that we still need to make, and you are key to that. And also, don't wait. Reach out to us. Come, when we're back in session, when things are a little bit back to normal, come shadow us for a day. Come see what it's like. Come be in those back rooms that used to be smoke-filled and just full of men, and are no longer smoke-filled or just full of men.
Yep.
Representative Warren and I, and watch that history be made. Watch the details be negotiated. Watch the conflict. But public policy changes lives, and so if you watch this whole thing, we want you to be part of that change.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Oh, well, I'm so glad we could do this. I thank you both so much for your time here. And I'm so pleased that I've been able to work alongside both of you and so many incredible and smart, dedicated women in the Maine legislature. So thank you for sharing today with us.